Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Sujit Saurabh, founder of Asian City Planners Network and voluntary online networking platform for city planners Pan Asia. So I'm here to welcome you all for the webinar series COVID-19 and Perspective of City Planners. After a successful first session, we bring to you a very interesting topic, enhancing urban resilience post-COVID. And to explore about this topic and enlighten us, we have with us Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajashekar, who has 15 plus years of experience working on different projects related to disaster risk reduction or vulnerability and resilience and much more. He also played a key role in creation of first city resilience strategy that adopted by the Surat under 100 resilient cities. And currently he is a chair of Urban Resilience Unit at National Institute of Urban Affairs. I welcome you, sir, for being with us. So I wanted to inform all the attendees before we start that it will be all the attendees will be in listen-only mode, and anyone can ask questions in the Q&A pop-up, or those who are listening us through YouTube Live can ask us questions in the chat box in the YouTube. So I'll set the brief for what are we going to discuss today. Like, we know that cities are engines of development or innovation or growth. So what happened is, with growing demand and constant demand and the pressure over the cities to give those standard of living and all those aspects, currently I think we are at a very strange and peculiar kind of crisis that we are in right now. Like, COVID is it could be a multiple triggered crisis that we are facing today. So, and cities right now are facing several other different kinds of shocks and stresses. It could be climate change, or it could be different kinds of erratic weather patterns, or it could be like and many more. And cities, in order to survive out of this, we need to prepare ourselves to for the future, and we need to bring resilient strategies into our daily lives, and to incorporate these kind of things. We are here to discuss like what is resilience exactly in a brief, and how exactly an IUA, or kind of as a chair, and how Dr. Mahesh is dealing with these kind of issues for India, or what he is currently playing a role as a chair in NIU. I think I'll start with that, and I'll give the floor to Dr. Mahesh. Uh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Surjit. And it's nice to be part of the webinar series. And I'd like to thank APCN for that opportunity. And I hope you're able to see the slides which are present. Hello.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk about today is a bit around urban resilience, what it means, and this is an initiative which has been on across more than 100 global cities for over 7 to 8 years now. But that said, when the initiative was started, the idea was not only look at major stresses which many of the cities are facing or were facing more predominantly in Southeast Asia and also in some of the developing countries. The idea is to bring in a holistic approach, and today with the current pandemic, which most of us are grappling to unravel the uncertainty which is involved in it, more terms of what is going to happen over the next couple of months. But this current situation also provides us an opportunity to step back and relook at some of our urban systems, which have been stressed, not only because of the virus, but it has been stressed because of various other reasons, and also the pace of urban development. Does this provide us an opportunity, a window of opportunity to look at holistic system level thinking and planning, and also bring about changes in the coming years? Because irrespective of what we are going through as of today, the situation is going to come back to normalcy within a few months or probably in a couple of years. But as we are grappling to understand what is happening and how we can avoid similar kind of situations in the future, it is going to be very important for us to relook into some of our planning systems and some of our urban development strategies, and look at a much different approach to avoid similar kinds of situations in the future, or be in a better position to manage similar kind of situations in the future. With that, as Sujit mentioned, I'm from National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is a premier institute in the country working towards dissemination of knowledge across urban practitioners. We also do conduct research, and we provide policy guidelines to central government, and also in some cases the state and the city government on various issues ranging from land economics, livelihood, environment, and climate change. And we are also currently supporting the government in their Smart City initiative to promote integrated solutions for urban India. With this as a basic concept, some 2 years back, Urban Resilience Unit was established within NIUA with the support of 100 Resilience City program, an initiative by Rockefeller Foundation. The idea, and while the program is called 100 Resilient Cities, basically there were 100 cities selected across the world through a competitive process based on cities' interests to help them build resilient strategies which could enable them to implement integrated solutions. And India is the only country where there is also a National Urban Resilience Unit, in addition to 3 cities which the program was supporting earlier. That included Surat, Pune, and Chennai. So one of the key aspects why a national unit was established in the country was primarily because of the population density and the growth across Indian cities. Even though 3 cities were selected, out of which 2 of them were pretty much megapolis, which is Chennai and Pune. And Surat, in terms of its economic growth, was quite substantial, and it contributes to the state GDP quite a lot. And given that scenario, it was not enough for a country like India, where certain interventions are undertaken in only selected few cities. With that in mind, the National Institute of Urban Affairs constituted the Urban Resilience Unit to not only build resilience support resilience building across few of the selected cities, but also try to look in terms of what can be brought about with respect to policy, with respect to planning, with respect to long-term thinking, and also to mainstream some of these activities within the ongoing missions and programs of the national government. So why is that required? As indicated earlier, cities are really complex systems where people, institutions, and infrastructures come together and to provide services. And any disruption in such service has a huge repercussion. And many of the cities in India were facing similar kind of situations even before COVID-19. If you look at last year, 16 cities did suffer from floods, and a complete state, Tamil Nadu, where the cities were suffering from water shortage at the same time. And there were also cities, pretty much 60% of India's urban population were pretty much exposed to urban heat wave during the last year. And the same thing was also happening in Europe, where cities like France, Spain, Portugal, Greece were suffering from heat stroke and heat wave. So, given that particular context, it was not very easy to come about, or the typical planning approach is how can we avoid heat strokes in the future? Or cities in India, especially Tamil Nadu, was how can Chennai avoid a similar drought in the future? While thinking such thing, short-term solutions, it's also important to look back and see where the systems performed very well or are performing very well, and where the systems need a revisit and a rethinking in terms of their current operational approach, and look in terms of a long-term, holistic approach towards urban solutions. And resilience provides a very good framework to address some of it. For example, if you look at simple urban water supply systems or currently our physical health systems, it is not only dependent on how we as urban residents move, but it is also integrated with a lot of other external environment and systems which do function together and sometimes not together to create certain challenges. And for example, when we are looking at water, we also need to look in terms of the rainfall and the catchment. We also have to look in terms of what is the different supply needs and the demand needs of various services, not only the urban ones, but also the peri-urban ones, including the agriculture. And usually the dam authorities have a conflicting interest of whether to store more water during monsoon to cater to the summer needs, or if the dam needs to have more space to accommodate the tail end of the monsoon season, especially the rainfall during the tail end of the monsoon season. Also, how buildings interact with its immediate environment and how various other aspects of urban planning and urban systems interact with each other. So, given the complexity, the current or the existing planning systems or the thinking did not provide a kind of a platform which could enable it. In spite of the 74th Amendment and what cities are being given in India in terms of their devolutionary, in terms of their powers, the devolutionary of some of the services did not happen fully across Indian cities. Over and above that, there are issues such as acute shocks, like what is happening right now. More than a disease outbreak, it's a pandemic situation where across the world, majority of the cases are surfacing in cities, and where the urban population density is quite high, and even in India, that is pretty much the case. 80% of our current COVID cases are coming from major cities, whereas the rural and the peri-urban areas are, able to manage or tackle this kind of situation, especially in terms of their advantage with respect to population density. Apart from that, like I said, there are also other associated things, like when we are talking right now, people are thinking about heat waves, people are going to start worrying about the extreme rainfall which may come in, and people would be worrying about not only these kinds of major shocks, but also the chronic stress. What would happen when we open up? How do we control or do a better traffic management? Or right now the pollution levels are quite low. Are we going to start thinking about improving or maintaining similar low pollution levels when the cities come back to their normalcy, or in the process of coming back to their normalcy? So the resilience not only addresses these kinds of challenges, but once there is a acute shock or a chronic stress within the system, how do we bounce back? How can cities come back to normalcy? How can we bounce back without affecting much of the livelihood, which is also the current debate across the country, where people are thinking about how do we bring the economy back, how do we make sure that the lost time and the lost resources are addressed as we move along in the future with the laborers, especially the migrant workers who are being sent back or who want to go back to their hometown or village. How do we restart the economy, and how do we bring them back in 3 to 4 months? So these are the complex set of questions where we are trying to address. But that said, it is also important for us to look back and also plan better in the coming years. So these kinds of shocks and stresses do affect the systems, and usually we are more reactive to that, which is very, very, very important. And India has managed to do that very well, over the last 2 decades, and especially in the last 15 years with the establishment of the National Disaster Management Authority and various state-level disaster management institutions, and also enhancing the Disaster Management Act, which was existing before 2005, or in many cases it did not exist pre-2005. So now the critical question is, of course, 3 to 6 months down the line, people will have to come out of the house. People will have to start thinking about how do we restart the economy, and people will have to start contributing to some of the sectors where they have already been working, and enhance the livelihood opportunities across the country. While we are doing that, it's also important to see that how fast we can get started, and how fast we can limit some of the damages, which are both economic, social, and also psychological, impact which has been caused by the current shock. And there are ways to do that, and that's where the resilient systems, provide to the people. It provides a framework through which the current planning mechanisms or the current strategy mechanism can be tested internally before rolling those things out, and that falls under the 7 characteristics of resilience. How are we reflective of the current situation? Our ability to learn, and also our ability to act based on the resourcefulness, because not all cities and not all states even across the country are equally resourceful. So while the central government is currently coming up with mechanisms and protocols for operation, it will ultimately come down to the states and also further down to the cities in terms of how better they manage it in the coming months. It's also something which one needs to think about, that whatever we are doing right now, is it going to be robust? Because there were certain initiatives and which were undertaken by the cities during the early onset of the lockdown. But are we going to ensure systems beyond the lockdown? Are the systems going to be robust? Are we having redundant systems? For example, if one person is not going to go to the office, or if a group of people who are managing a very critical system, for example, doctors, health professionals, police, and even municipal workers who are handling systems such as water supply, energy, sewage and sanitation. How do we create redundancy as we proceed further? Because many a times it can so happen that people may get sick, or people may end up quarantining themselves. But when that happens, do we have mechanisms to overcome such cures, or such points where things can be made much more flexible, rather than things are rigid, and things can be innovative by both being inclusive and also integrated. Even though it doesn't sound that well, how do you mean that innovative should also be inclusive or integrated? In spite of our best efforts, we all know in India the planning systems are well developed or well implemented for with respect to economy. In that regard, I think going back, it resilience provides a kind of a overarching framework, and it also provides a mechanism to help develop integration across multiple sectors. And one of that is the city resilience framework, which has been rolled out and tried and tested across 100 cities in India. And this resilience framework, early on, it not only talks about the economy and the society based on the current infrastructure and environment and development plans, but it critically looks at how leadership and strategy can help, and how health and well-being can be enhanced across the society. Of course, these are the four main pillars over which 12 sub-pillars of it reside. It includes not only meeting the basic demands, but also supports employment and ensures that public health services are better provided. And also in the time of such physical distancing, how we can engage with the community to better awareness through better communication, so on and so forth. Because what is right now happening may also lead to subsequent other impacts. For example, I remember in 2001, post the earthquake, it was not the earthquake which affected the people, but the disruption of services post the earthquake, which had a long impact on the cities. And also, this is an example from the flooding which took place in Surat in 2006. We may all think that poor are vulnerable, which is the case in many of the contexts. But it may also be that the rich and also people who can afford certain basic services are also vulnerable. So in 2006, when the flood took place, the flooding period was only 3 to 4 days. But during the 3 to 4 days, people thought that the flooding may lead to an epidemic, which happened in 1996. So they feared that, and they started moving out of the city. So post the 3-day flood, the city took around 15 to 20 days to come back to normalcy in terms of cleaning the streets, ensuring better health services are provided to the vulnerable. But when the city came back to its normalcy, there were no, workers who were left within the city to undertake some of the work which were happening, especially within the diamond polishing industry and also within the textile industry. So these industries, which constitute around more than 80% of the city GDP, stopped working, and it took 3 months for some of the systems, and it's also the natural systems and also our social systems, which are going to ensure whether we can contain it, contain the spread, or which will cater to the pandemic spreading even further. And this includes ensuring how do we measure the public health initiatives which are being undertaken, and also facilitate some kind of collaboration. Currently, these kinds of collaborations are happening in an informal manner, but how can these the same be formalized? And also increasing the awareness and also the behavioral change across the large segment of people without creating fear and panic. And also, how do we ensure mobility and transportation? And this is something which is going to be a very critical issue. And some of you may be following the news. Cities, some of them, especially post the phase 2 of the lockdown, there were some cities which opened up, and they were able to see a surge in the number of people who came out, and leading to traffic jams and leading to challenges in the mobility. So how can we use data and evidence-based services and better mapping and informed decision making? It's in order to develop I mean, we have come a long way. I remember 15 years back, people were still moving on towards a better connectivity in urban areas, especially internet connectivity or also mobile connectivity. But right now we have come a long way. We have technology, we have systems, and we have IoTs in place which can help inform people almost in a real-time manner with respect to how they are moving around. And even the recent Arogya Setu app by the government of India is trying to promote that in order to track mobility of the people to ensure that we can do a contact tracing in case anybody gets affected. And also, how do we mobilize global and local partners to support data and also mapping? I think some of it is already taking place right now, and some of it are in a fast track mode. Cities where the technology is not there or are suffering are trying to see how they can better work with the community to enable it. So the other thing which is also most important and is being discussed but never brought in terms of the planning guidelines, but it's important to look in terms of it, is how do we enable or bring back the livelihoods? How do we ensure that the economic impact is short term, and how do we boost the fiscal capacity of some of the municipalities, and how can their actions be prioritized so that the resources are targeted in the right way? And also, how do we build back better? How do we create coalitions, and how do we use the knowledge where some of the cities may be doing better, but how do we quickly capture that knowledge and bring about an integrated or replicated much faster across the cities? So two of the initiatives, even though there are a lot happening in the country, as a part of the Smart City mission, there were a lot of integrated command and control centers which were established across 17 cities in India. And there were also 100 data officers who were identified, and these nodal officers were brought in place in the month of November last year. So these are some systems which happen to provide also a very good mechanism to address the current problem. And parallelly, as we are talking earlier, I did mention about what Europe is doing. Currently, they have instituted a collaboration across many of the global institutions, including some in the Europe, UK, Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany, but also some in US and Singapore, to come together and look in terms of how cities can better address the heat problem. In the case of India, it is going to be not only heat, but it is also going to be floods and other associated social challenges which we need to start thinking about. Because last year, when France did go through the heat wave, they asked most of their urban residents to come out of their houses, to come to public parks, to come to open areas, to cooler spaces, and so on and so forth. Right now, most of the government restricting people's movement and advising them to stay indoors, how are they going to plan the heat wave, the upcoming heat wave, is a critical question for some of these countries, and they have already started working. And many of the Indian cities, they have also showcased how they are handling the situation. Some are able to better manage it, and this is one of the document by in India, in the NCR region, where how is Gurugram handling the COVID situation, how they are able to create a better social movement by bringing in INGOs and trying to address the challenge. Within NIUA, we have been looking at the situation from also from a holistic perspective. So it's not only important for us to look at cities coming back to normalcy, but how can we look at urbanization and economic growth given the current situation? And how do we reflect on the current urban finance and governance mechanism? Can we enhance it? Can we come up with some kind of a policy guidelines which could enable both the central, state, and the city governments institute a better mechanism in the future. How do we build urban infrastructure and environment in a more sustainable manner given the current situation, and also using windows of opportunities? I remember in 1996, when Surat was affected by plague, the city municipal corporation ensured that the roads are widened so fire engines and other municipal services can reach some of the most congested spaces. While the plan was in play for for over a decade, the municipal corporation got the public support post the plague situation, and they were able to implement the fact of identifying and buying out public properties to increase the road width. Same with respect to environment, climate change, and the current environmental situation has improved in some of the places, and now the question is, how do we maintain it as we move forward, and how do we bring about interventions not only addressing the current challenge but also looking at some of the future challenges like climate change into it. And of course, the last but not the least, how do we enable social development in a more planned manner? With that, I'll take you through some of the initiatives which we are doing with respect to planning, policy and planning, research, technology, data, knowledge management, and partnership. While I'm presenting some of these things, these are not the only ways as we move forward, but these are some of them. But it's important to think, step back and think in a holistic approach, and that's the whole idea for building a safe and a better future ahead. Of course, the current planning mechanisms have been mostly based on land use and land cover. What people have been talking about is the land use, land cover based approach is really not going to work. You have to bring in a systems approach with multiple sector infused into it, especially network. Right now, what we have realized is the virus is not spreading, not only because of a certain land use, land cover type or certain geoclimatic type, but it has a high dependence on the network. How people are using public and private transportation, how people are moving within the cities, how water services and other services, are delivered to people, including, basic things like groceries are delivered. So most of these services, which both municipal corporation and also some of the private sectors are providing, are all network based. How do we bring a network based approach within our policy and planning is one of the key areas where we are working on. And of course, research and advocacy. When we talk about an integrated approach, how we can bring it within a framework, within a national level framework, which can not only look in terms of the economy or which can look in terms of the demography, but it will look in terms of water supply, sewage, drainage, solid waste, energy, transportation, building, and also the weather and climatic systems, including environment and the current risk information what we have. So these frameworks are going to be really important as we move forward, and we have to start thinking differently to especially take decisions, not only at an individual level, but also for municipal corporations to take decisions to address the current and also future complex problems. And also with respect to data, there are many initiatives which are happening with respect to data, and this is one of the framework for assessing the city's preparedness to manage a disaster. And this includes both geological, hydrometeorological, and also public health. And when we look at it, this is one of the cities, I don't want to name the city, but the red indicates that the city fares poorly with respect to certain systems. and where they are very progressive are still they are in orange scale, which means that there is a huge scope for improvement. While this is a sample city, and I'm sure that many of the Indian cities were in the similar state. Over here, we evaluated more than 60 parameters to actually identify which are the critical gaps. And when we do that, we realize that there is a lot more to improve within urban systems. And the current situation provides us an opportunity to look at it in an integrated manner and not in an isolated manner. Also, in terms of the technology, this is one of the map which was made by an NGO which is working in the city. And individuals who were ex-graduates from CEPT got together and started analyzing the trends and the pattern of the spread of COVID across the city of Ahmedabad. And they started identifying spaces where the pandemic may spread, or which requires containment, or where city government needs to concentrate their resources given the current situation. I think maps and data sets and information like this is going to basically transform the way we operate and function. And currently, with the help of the technologies which are there in the market, it becomes much more easier to deploy it. In some 20 years back, deploying a GIS system to be open and operated using a mobile phone was pretty much unthinkable. But right now, as we speak, cases which are being detected on a daily basis are uploaded on such GIS platforms, and the spread can both be visualized by common people and also by other urban decision makers. And one of the key things which it all comes down to, and this is something which we need to start looking at more in a more robust manner, and also create platforms for such engagements of multiple stakeholders. The current problem, like I said, is not only handled by the government agencies, but there are a lot of NGOs and INGOs which are working on the ground to provide basic, sustenance materials to people, including food and shelter. But they are going beyond that and also trying to help people access certain emergency services, health services, also providing information to people on with respect to what the government policies are, government plans are, how do they register, how do they move about, and what the future is going to be. So this involves not only business communities and municipalities and some of the government agencies, but right now more and more we see engagement from educational institutions which are working in this line, social media, and other big data providers. They have stepped up and they have come up with applications. They have come up with awareness material. They have come up with tracking systems which can support the initiatives of the government. And finally, it is also citizens. They have been very active in terms of their engagement, even if it is limited to their community, but also in terms of how best they can adapt themselves and how best they can react to the situation being in their house. So with that, I will stop. But the more important talk is importance of this particular talk is, of course, the immediate needs, the immediate reactionary, the immediate reactions which the government machineries and other social systems are undertaking are very, very important. But many of us who have the ability to sit back and to have an understanding of planning systems in India, policy systems in India, and who, especially the urban planners across the country, there is a larger need of us to start looking at it from not only the micro perspective of short term, but also the macro perspective of how do we use this as a window of opportunity to look in terms of integrated systems, innovative systems, and adaptive and resilient systems, which as we move forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the holistic talk of the entire urban resilience and what are the aspects you are doing with NIUA and the other. And it's key to actually know that data is crucial for planning and in other sense also, because how we plan for future, or how we become informed to do any of those future decisions is based, and it should be based on the data. And I think that's very true. There is one question that's coming. I'm going to questions right now from the attendees. So one question is asking, how are we going to address the issues of capacity at municipality level and absence of experts in cities? And how are we planning to generate the data? So this is one question that's asked. So yeah.
I think the first question with respect to capacity building is very, very crucial, and I think it's a very, very important question. How do we enable some of the cities to start thinking along these directions? Because right now they are not used to. For that, some of the think tanks, including the ones within NIUA, we have started working towards identifying tools and frameworks and systems which could be used by municipal corporation to uh, quickly plan for the current need, but also enable them to look at things holistically because they are not used to it. Also, there is through other initiatives, like I said, within the Smart City mission, there are 100 special purpose vehicles which have been established in the country. Apart within these SPVs, there are 100 data officers who are there currently being nominated, and these people were nominated in the month of November. So right now they become the champions for coordinating information and data source across multiple departments. Some of them have been very active, especially cities such as Pune, cities such as Chennai, and also the places like Ahmedabad and Mumbai. They have started using these command and control centers as a very good platform for coordinating across multiple stakeholders. That said, the training and capacity building is not something which we need to look at it from a short term. Training and capacity building is also something which we need to look at it from a very long term. And that's where educational institutions come into play. And that's where the future planners, people who are going to graduate and start coming back into the mainstream needs to start thinking about it early on, because the typical planning systems of land use, land cover based approach, or typical working mechanisms in terms of I will sit in within my department and start doing my master plan is really not going to work. People need to start thinking about how do we go beyond that and start interacting with multiple departments and incorporate their needs within the urban planning is going to be very crucial. I also want to highlight one of the key initiatives which the ministry is undertaking, where I'll be leading the Climate Center for Cities, within which we are planning to train over 200 professionals across the country, provide them with a certificate through a certificate program, through which they can then be the champions of some of these tools and frameworks and systems. So there is a big opportunity also for the young planners and graduating planners in order to work and engage with the city. This is something which was supposed to be rolled out on the May 1st, but with COVID, we are delaying the process, but it is going to soon come out. And I encourage most of the students to keep track of what's happening within CQ. It's called Climate Center for Cities within NIUA. And there, one of the key will be providing training and capacity building across to a larger segment of people.
There are so many questions that suddenly rolled up. So one question is on density. So with the growing cases in high density areas of COVID-19, now how we will we tackle the potential densification or the future? It will be a compact city kind of development, or what should be? I mean, could be the densification that we should see for the future cities. So yeah.
See, density is a critical challenge for a country like India. If we look at our urban development, uh, which has happened over the last 3 decades, pretty much our urban population has tripled. When the 1991 census figures came out, we were somewhere around you know uh, I think 14 to 15% urbanized. But right now we are 33% urbanized. So all that thing happened during a very short period of time. And what we are projecting for the next 20 years is the urban population will increase by another 20% and go to 50% by 2040 or 2050. So in that particular context, first of all, irrespective of the fact that how do we manage the urban density in the upcoming cities, future small towns, which may turn out to be a bigger city in the next 20 years, we cannot ask people to move out of these already megapolis and metropolis which are there in India. 33% of our urban population is already in a high density area. So it is not that we can do away with that density and start moving towards urban sprawl. It's very important for us to look in terms of how we can better manage that particular density. How do we communicate better to people? How do social systems work irrespective of the density being there? And how do we take advantage of it? So that is the current thinking. But also as we move forward, like I said, it's important for us to start looking at it from a network oriented approach. I think the solution to that problem or to that challenge is going to lie how best we can manage the networks. So currently our understanding of networks are very weak. We still work with a land use land cover based approach, and that has to change.
There is a question on transportation. You have talked about it, but yeah, how do you view transport post COVID in large cities like Delhi or somewhere? So how can public transport adapt, especially when it is already lacking in services or some basic other things? So how this has to be tackled? I mean, in your view.
See, I think with the current systems, it can also pose a negative challenge, where people are not going to trust public transportation more. So that can be a direction which some of the cities may take. And some of the cities, given the current economic situation, may also halt some of their public transportation initiatives and plans which they were initially considering. But there is also a window of opportunity for other systems like transit-oriented mobility, which never was able to take shape in big cities. Now it provides an opportunity for that to resurface. If you go and close a busy street during pre-COVID times, there used to be a huge hue and cry, from people. Why did you close this road? It's very important for the economic activity. But right now we have an ability to experiment new models. As some of the cities are slowly coming out of the lockdown, I think some of the cities have the opportunity to experiment with these, transit-oriented development models. They can start closing some of the streets, start making some of the areas pedestrian-friendly, so that people can maintain social distancing at the same time, move around. People can start looking at alternate means of transportation, like bicycling, in some of the cities, and people can also start appreciating, walkability within certain cities, creating of green spaces, and so on and so forth. I think transportation. It's very important that we need to revisit public transportation. I think that is the current emerging need will be how we can manage the crowd, how we can ensure the spread, or ensure that we can contain the spread when the public transportations open up. But that said, it also gives some of the cities an opportunity to innovate, to rethink, and to implement some of the plans and projects which earlier was very difficult to implement or get a buy-in from the people.
Yes, thank. And there is again the question of pollution levels that have come down during the COVID, and what measures should the government or the cities or ULBs should take, to keep that in the same current situation.
I think what measures the cities need to take is quite evident. With the current measures which many of the cities are taking, the resultant pollution levels have come down significantly. So we know that it can be contained in the future. But that said, I think pollution levels will be back to normal within a very short duration of time once we go back to business as usual. So I'm hoping that some of the institutions which have managed to work from home during these may also extend that beyond the current pandemic situation. That may lead to reduced traffic. Some of them may also relook in terms of the urbanization per se, and have a much more stricter enforcement mechanism, especially in terms of the mobility, public mobility. And that may also lead to a small amount of reduction. But as we move forward, it is important for us to think that we should not go with a make gap arrangement, because I'm not very optimistic that the pollution levels will remain this low even when we open up. The pollution, it takes only a few days, and the pollution levels may come back to normalcy. So if you are asking for a solution, I don't have one, but it's important for us to think around it, and it's not that it cannot be done. Now at least we have that hope that things can change, right? People living in Delhi, even I was...
In the same context, if I say that, if this is on a lighter note, but the government start planning like, we do Earth Hour kind of thing to kind of make aware of the pollution and other climate crisis. But also, can we do a similar kind of situation where we lock down the cities or somewhere in a week or a day or a 2 day or something like that in a year, something which can be, that's a very kind of idea, but yeah, what do you think if that happens?
Yeah, that's the same as the current lockdown, right? You do it for a few hours, it's really not going to have a significant impact. If you're polluting 364 or days, and if you say that one day I'm not going to pollute, it is really not going to help. But on a similar lighter note, I think now people in Delhi know what breathing fresh air is. So probably I hope they demand for it more.
Yeah.
Earlier they couldn't differentiate. Now at least they know what difference does it make to their body and to their immediate environment. So
one question is on would you like to share some initiatives in neighborhood level resilience? Like what are those look like? What could be the initiatives at a neighborhood scale?
See, there is, I recommend people to go to the Smartnet. There are a lot of initiatives which have been undertaken by the cities are being projected. But right now, with the current situation, I think many of the cases are being documented, as we speak, what different initiatives are being done. Many of the people who are actually doing do not have the time to sit back and reflect on it and document it in a very comprehensive manner. But that said, a lot of institutions are taking an effort to document some of the good practices, and I'm sure that many of them will be made available in the coming months. One thing which I showed you, that is the COVID integrated approach. This was done at many of the initiatives which this document presents is also at the community level. So people can refer similar documents, and many such documents are already available on the Smartnet. And there is going to be a specific knowledge portal for cities, which is currently being developed by NIUA, where all the cities and all the community level interventions which are being documented can be parked for people to learn and also replicate.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, because I just participated yesterday in one of the meetings with UNNDCY, which is like United Nations major group for youth, children and youth, where we talked about, I was a member of those things, and we talked about the renewable energy and post-COVID kind of situation, like what youth can do. And they were asking like what the current practices that are happening right now at the particular during COVID, and what needs to be done. And that those are kind of different organizations that came into mind that are mapping or doing documentation on these particular kind of initiatives or practices that are happening during the COVID situation. I think we will end by this, and I will ask Trisha, who is president of NOSPlan, to share her end remarks. Yeah, over to you, Trisha.
Hi, thanks, Sujit. Thank you, sir, for giving such a wonderful presentation. I would just like to say that in midst of this crisis and this chaos that we are going through, we really need to learn how to address our vulnerabilities and enhance our capability through tools of planning, and how to build resilience. And we need to get back to the basics of planning history, where where public health was a large issue, a major issue, and we need to eliminate all vulnerabilities that are possible, and continue our efforts by maybe addressing this through addressing the issue by climate action or and sustainability. And we need to learn from this crisis, and we need to build back better. So I really thank all the attendees for registering, and all of you who have attended this session, and also to the people who are watching on YouTube Live. And I really appeal to everybody to be helpful to those who are vulnerable during this crisis, and make it possible, and make it possible for them to be aware of all the changes. And please stay at home, stay safe, even if you are in the green zone, and take